The battle began with fire and chaos. Galaxy's 3 ships opened fire simultaneously, their plasma cannons sending streaks of blue death across the void. The Wandering Star twisted and dove with Deho at the helm, avoiding the worst of the barrage. While returning fire with its limited weapons, Kisira launched her shuttle from the cargo bay and immediately threw herself into the fight. Her combat instincts came alive as she weaved between enemy fire and targeted the engines of the nearest ship. She had spent her entire life training for ground combat, but piloting was not so different. It was still about reading patterns and exploiting weaknesses and moving faster than your opponent expected. Her first missile struck the enemy ship's port thruster and sent it spinning out of formation. One ship disabled. She reported through the communication channel. "Good work," Deho replied, his voice steady despite the explosions visible through his cockpit window. "Focus on the second one while I keep the third busy." The disabled ship tumbled away from the battle, its crew struggling to regain control. Kisira did not waste time watching it. She angled her shuttle toward the second ship and opened fire with everything she had. The shuttle's weapons were weak compared to full warships, but she was not trying to destroy her target. She was trying to distract it. The second ship turned its attention to her, giving the Wandering Star a precious moment to reposition. Deho took full advantage, landing a direct hit on the ship's weapon systems with a well-placed torpedo. Sparks and debris exploded from the damaged vessel. 2 ships down, 1 to go, but the third ship was the largest and most dangerous of the group. Its captain had learned from watching the others fall and was not making the same mistakes. It kept its distance while laying down suppressing fire that made approach nearly impossible. "I cannot get close," Kisira said through gritted teeth as another burst of plasma nearly clipped her wing. "Neither can I," Deho admitted. "We need to try something different." Before either of them could formulate a new plan, the communication system crackled with Galaxy's voice. "Impressive," the crime boss admitted with grudging respect. "I did not expect you to last this long." "Full of surprises," Deho replied. "But it ends now." The third ship fired something new, a glowing projectile that moved too fast to dodge. It struck the Wandering Star directly in the engine section. Alarms screamed throughout the ship as critical systems began to fail. Kisira watched in horror as the cargo vessel started to drift, smoke pouring from its damaged hull. "Deho," she shouted into the communication channel. Deho responded. Static was her only answer. The third ship began moving toward the crippled Wandering Star with predatory slowness. Galax was savoring his victory. Kisira felt cold fury building in her chest. She had spent 3 months running from her shame and 3 months learning from a human who had shown her a different way to live. She had finally found something worth fighting for, and now it was about to be taken away. No, she would not allow it. Kisira aimed her shuttle directly at the third ship and pushed the engines to maximum power. She had 1 missile left and 1 chance to make it count. The enemy vessel saw her coming and opened fire with everything it had. Plasma bolts streaked past her cockpit, each one close enough to light up her instruments with warning signals. She did not slow down. She did not try to evade. She flew straight and true, letting her instincts guide her through the storm of fire. At the last possible moment, she launched her final missile directly at the ship's bridge. Then she pulled up hard, her shuttle screaming in protest as G-forces threatened to tear it apart. The missile struck home. The third ship's bridge exploded in a brilliant flash of light and debris. Without its command center, the vessel began to drift aimlessly, its weapons falling silent. Kisira circled back toward the Wandering Star with her heart pounding against her ribs. "Deho," she called again. "Please respond." A crackle of static. Then his voice came through, weak but alive. "Still here," he said. Barely. Relief washed through her like a physical wave. "I'm coming to dock with you," she said. "Do not die before I get there." "Would not dream of it." She maneuvered her shuttle to the Wandering Star's emergency docking port and connected with practiced precision. The moment the seal was secure, she was running through the corridors toward the bridge she found. Deho slumped against the pilot's console with blood running down his face from a cut on his forehead. Specialist Yunji was beside him, trying to apply emergency bandages with shaking hands. He took shrapnel when the console exploded, Yunji reported with tears in her eyes. I do not know how bad it is. Kisira knelt beside Deho and examined his wounds with the clinical eye of a warrior who had seen thousands of injuries. The cut was ugly, but not deep. The real danger was the piece of metal embedded in his shoulder. He will live, she said firmly, but we need to get him to a medical facility soon. Deho opened his eyes and looked at her with a weak smile. You saved us, he said quietly. I saved myself, she corrected. You just happened to benefit. He laughed and then winced as the movement aggravated his wounds. Either way, I think your debt is paid. Kisira froze the combat debt. She had forgotten about it in the chaos of the battle. By saving Deho's life, she had fulfilled the terms of the ancient law that bound her to him. She was free. She could leave right now and return to the Drethan homeworld to face whatever punishment awaited her. Or she could disappear into the galaxy and start a new life somewhere, far from anyone who knew her shame. She could go anywhere, do anything, be anyone. Deho seemed to read her thoughts. The debt is paid, he repeated softly. You do not owe me anything anymore. Kisira looked at this human who had defeated her and spared her and taught her and trusted her. She thought about Drethan honor and Drethan shame and all the rules she had lived by for her entire life. Then she made a choice. I know, she said, but I am staying anyway. Deho blinked in surprise. Why? Because for 3 months you have been showing me something my culture never taught me, she said. You showed me that strength is not just about winning, that mercy is not weakness, that there is more to life than dominance and glory. She paused and searched for the right words. You treated me like an equal, even when I was your property. You gave me respect even though I lost to you. You trusted me to fight beside you even after everything. She met his eyes with fierce certainty. I do not want to go back to a life where none of that exists. I want to stay here and learn more about this strange human way of living. Deho was silent for a long moment. Then he extended his uninjured hand toward her. Then stay, he said simply, as a member of this crew, not as property or debt. Just as yourself. Kisira took his hand and felt something shift inside her chest. The last pieces of her old identity crumbled away. But for the first time, it did not feel like loss. It felt like freedom. What do humans call someone who chooses to fight beside you? She asked. Deho smiled despite his pain. A friend. Kisira tested the word in her mouth. It was a strange sound in her voice. A concept that had no real equivalent in Drethan culture. But it felt right somehow. Friend, she repeated. I think I like that. Hours later, after Deho had been stabilized and the ship's critical systems had been patched together, the crew of the Wandering Star gathered on the observation deck. Yunji had made tea for everyone, and they sat together watching the stars drift by. Where do we go now? Yunji asked quietly. Deho looked at Kisira. What do you think? The former champion of the Crimson Arena considered the question carefully. Behind her was a life of glory and shame, victory and defeat, rules that had defined her existence until they nearly destroyed her. Ahead was something unknown and uncertain, a universe full of possibilities she had never imagined. Forward, she said finally. We go forward. Deho nodded and began plotting a course toward the nearest friendly station. The Wandering Star limped through space with its hull scarred and its engines damaged. But its crew was intact and its spirit was unbroken. And somewhere in the galaxy, whispers began to spread about a human who had defeated the undefeatable champion and a Drethan warrior who had learned that there were more important things than never losing. Some said it was impossible. Some said it was a lie, but those who knew the truth understood that the universe had changed in a small but significant way. Because when a human showed mercy to an enemy, and when that enemy chose to become a friend, both of them became something greater than they had ever been alone. That was the real victory. That was the lesson the galaxy would never forget. And somewhere on a battered cargo ship drifting through the stars, Kazira Vaughn smiled for the first time in years. She was not a champion anymore. She was something better. She was free. 3 months had passed since the fight in the Crimson Arena. Kazira Vaughn stood on the observation deck of a small cargo ship called the Wandering Star, watching distant planets drift by through the reinforced windows. Her broken arm had healed weeks ago with the help of the ship's medical systems. The physical wounds were gone, but the invisible ones remained. She still could not sleep without seeing the faces of the crowd as they watched her beg. She still heard their screams of disgust echoing in her mind every time she closed her eyes. The door behind her opened and Yoon Daeho stepped onto the observation deck with 2 cups of something hot in his hands. Tea, he said. Offering one of the cups to her, Kazira accepted it without meeting his eyes. This had become their routine over the past months. He would find her brooding somewhere on the ship and offer her tea or food or simple conversation. She never asked for these things, and he never waited to be asked. At first she had resented his kindness. She had seen it as mockery, a way of reminding her that she belonged to him now. But as the weeks passed, she had begun to understand that Daeho treated everyone on his crew the same way he checked on the young specialist named Cha Yoonji every morning to make sure she was adjusting after her capture on Station Varth 9. He helped the ship's engineer with repairs, even when it was not his job. He cooked meals for the crew and cleaned up afterward without complaint. He acted nothing like an owner. He acted like something else entirely, something Kazira had no word for in her language. You are thinking about the arena again, Daeho said quietly. It was not a question. He had learned to read her moods with uncomfortable accuracy. I cannot stop, she admitted. Every time I try to sleep, I see their faces. Daeho nodded and sipped his tea. The faces of the crowd. The faces of the Drethin, she corrected. My own people, looking at me like I was filth to be scraped from their boots. She turned to face him, her yellow eyes burning with emotions she could not name. I was the greatest warrior my species had produced in 3 generations, she said with her voice cracking. I trained my entire life to bring honor to my bloodline. And in one night I destroyed everything. You survived. Daeho replied simply, survival without honor is meaningless. Is it? Kazira stared at him with frustration. She had been having variations of this conversation with him for months, and she still could not make him understand. In Drethin culture, yes, she insisted. Our worth comes from victory, from dominance, from proving ourselves superior to all challengers. And what happens when you lose? Daeho asked. You die with dignity or you live in shame. Those are the only options. Yes. Daeho set down his tea and looked at her with those calm eyes that had haunted her since the arena. Then your culture is incomplete, he said. Kazira felt anger flare in her chest. You presume to judge the traditions of a species thousands of years older than yours. I presume to point out a flaw in logic, he replied without any change in his tone. You define worth by victory, but victory is temporary and defeat is inevitable. Not for me, she snapped. I never lost before you, and now you have, he said simply. So by your own culture's standards, you are worthless. But are you? Kazira opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. You are still the same person who won 847 fights, Daeho continued. The same person who trained for decades to master combat. The same person with all that skill and knowledge and experience. He paused, and his eyes softened. One loss does not erase everything you are, Cassira. It just adds something new to learn from. She wanted to argue with him. She wanted to explain that he did not understand. Dreth in honor or dreth in shame. But somewhere deep inside her, a small voice whispered that maybe he understood better than she did. Maybe the problem was not that she had lost. Maybe the problem was that her entire identity had been built on something as fragile as an unbroken record. The ship's communication system crackled to life with the voice of Specialist Cha Yunji. Sergeant Yun, we have a problem. Daeho was moving toward the bridge. Before she finished speaking, Cassira followed out of instinct, her warrior training overriding her emotional turmoil on the bridge. Yunji pointed to the sensor display with a trembling finger. 3 ships just dropped out of faster than light travel behind us, she reported. They are broadcasting Galaxy's identification codes. Cassira felt cold dread settle in her stomach. He found us. Looks that way, Daeho said calmly, already calculating distances and angles in his head. How? Yunji asked with fear creeping into her voice. We have been running for months. Galax has connections everywhere, Cassira answered. He probably put bounties on all of us the moment we left his station. She turned to Daeho with grim certainty. He will not stop until we are dead. All of us. Then we need to make sure that does not happen, Daeho replied. He began issuing orders with quiet efficiency, directing the crew to prepare for invasive maneuvers and possible combat. Cassira watched him work and felt something strange stirring in her chest. He showed no fear, even though they were outnumbered and outgunned. He did not panic or rage or despair. He simply assessed the situation and did what needed to be done. This was a different kind of strength than anything she had known before. Not the overwhelming power of a predator crushing weaker prey, not the dominance of a champion destroying challengers. This was the quiet strength of someone who faced impossible odds and refused to surrender. The communication system crackled again with a new voice. Harsh and familiar human. Galax's voice echoed through the bridge. Did you really think you could embarrass me and escape without consequences? Daeho activated the reply channel. I had hoped. You made me look weak, Galax snarled. You defied me in my own arena and walked away with my champion as your property. She was never your property to begin with. Galax laughed his horrible laugh. It does not matter now. Human, in a few minutes you will all be dead, and I will finally have my satisfaction. The channel closed, and the 3 pursuing ships began to accelerate toward the wandering star. Cassira stepped forward. Let me fight them. Daeho looked at her with surprise. You owe me nothing, she said fiercely. But you gave me 3 months of life that I did not deserve. Let me repay that debt now, by dying in a hopeless battle, by fighting beside you instead of running away. She held his gaze without flinching. I do not know if your philosophy about loss and worth is correct, but I know that hiding in my quarters while you face danger is not who I want to be. Daeho studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. We have a small shuttle in the cargo bay, he said. It has basic weapons and decent maneuverability. Can you pilot it? I can pilot anything. Then get to the shuttle, he ordered. We will coordinate our attacks to maximize confusion. Cassira nodded and ran toward the cargo bay without looking back for the first time in 3 months. She felt something other than shame and despair. She felt purpose. She did not know if she would survive the coming battle. She did not know if any of them would survive, but she knew with absolute certainty that she would rather die fighting beside this strange human than live another day as a broken shadow of who she used to be. Perhaps Daeho was right. Perhaps one loss did not define her. Perhaps she could build a new identity from the ashes of the Old one. But first, she had to prove to herself that she was still a warrior. Not for honor or glory or the approval of her species. For something new. Something that had no name in Drethan language. Something that felt suspiciously like hope. The words hung in the air like a curse. Please spare me. Human, no Drethan champion had ever spoken such words in the entire history of their species. Warriors who lost in combat, died with honor, or lived in eternal shame. There was no middle ground. And there was no mercy. Begging was the ultimate disgrace. Cassira knew this better than anyone. She had been trained from birth to believe that death was preferable to defeat. Her teachers had beaten this lesson into her scales and her bones, and her very soul. A Drethan warrior never surrendered. A Drethan champion never begged. But here she was on her knees before a human. Tears streaming down her face as she pleaded for her life. The arena erupted into chaos. The Drethan spectators howled with rage and disgust at the sight of their champion's disgrace. Some threw objects at the arena floor, while others screamed insults in their native tongue. The other species watched with a mixture of shock and fascination. They had never seen anything like this before. No one had Gulak stood in his viewing platform with his gray face twisted in fury. This was not what he had planned. He had wanted a quick death and a satisfied crowd. Instead, he had gotten a scandal that would spread across the sector within hours. Kill her. He bellowed through the arena's speaker system. Finish the fight or face the consequences. The human looked up at the viewing platform with calm eyes that held no fear. The fight is over. He called back in a voice that carried across the silent arena. I have won. The fight ends when one combatant is dead. Gulak snarled. Those are the rules of the Crimson Arena. Then change the rules. The crowd murmured at the human's audacity. No one defied Gulak on his own station. No one challenged his authority and lived to speak of it. But this human stood in the middle of the arena, with blood on his face and victory in his hands. And he refused to take a life that had already been defeated. Cassira watched him through blurry eyes and felt something she could not name stirring in her chest. Why was he doing this? Why was he risking everything to spare an enemy who had tried to kill him? She did not understand humans at all. Gulak's voice came through the speakers again, colder now and filled with menace. If you will not kill her, then my guards will kill you both. Armed soldiers began pouring into the arena from multiple entrances. They carried plasma, rifles and shock batons and war armor that could stop most. Conventional weapons, there were at least 50 of them and more were coming. The human looked at the approaching soldiers without any change in his expression. Then he did something that made no sense at all. He reached down and helped Cassira to her feet. Can you walk? He asked quietly. Cassira stared at him in confusion. Her broken arm hung uselessly at her side, and her legs trembled with exhaustion. Every part of her body screamed with pain. Why? She managed to whisper. Why are you helping me? Because you asked me to spare you. He replied simply, and I said yes. He positioned himself between Cassira and the approaching guards, putting his battered body between her, the weapons aimed at them both. A human protecting a Drethan warrior. The universe had truly gone mad in the viewing platform. Gulak watched with narrow eyes. He had underestimated this human badly. The creature was not just a fighter. He was something far more dangerous. He was principled. Hold. Gulak commanded his guards through the communication system. The soldiers stopped their advance but kept their weapons raised. Gulak's mind raced through possibilities. Killing the human would satisfy his pride, but it would also create problems. Word of this fight had already spread beyond the station. Traders and travelers had recorded the entire thing on their personal devices. If Gulak executed a human who had won fairly and shown mercy to his opponent, the human governments would demand answers. Humanity might be new to the galactic stage, but they were not weak. Their fleets were small, but their soldiers were fierce. and they protected their own with a loyalty that bordered on insanity. Starting. A conflict with Earth over one dead human was not worth the trouble. But Galax could not simply let the human walk away, either. His authority depended on fear and respect. If he showed weakness here, others would begin to question his power. He needed a solution that preserved his reputation while avoiding a diplomatic incident. Then an idea formed in his calculating mind. Human. He called out through the speakers, "I offer you a compromise." Deho looked up at the viewing platform but said nothing. "There is an old law in the Galactic Codes," Galax continued, "a combat debt law from before the unified treaties were signed. I know of it." Deho replied. Kasira listened with growing confusion. She had never heard of such a law. "If you invoke the combat debt," Galax explained, "the one you defeated becomes your property until the debt is repaid." The crowd murmured at this revelation. Most of them had never heard of this ancient law, either it was a relic from a more brutal era, when warriors claimed their defeated enemies as slaves or servants. "You would allow this?" Deho asked with suspicion clear in his voice. "I care nothing for the Drethin or their champion," Galax replied with a dismissive wave of his fat hand. "She has embarrassed herself and her species with her begging." He leaned forward with a cruel smile. "Take her if you want her, human, but leave my station before sunrise, or I will kill you both regardless of the political consequences." Deho looked at Kasira. She could not meet his eyes. Shame burned through her like acid, worse than any physical wound she had begged for her life in front of thousands of witnesses. She had disgraced her species and her training and everything she had ever believed in, and now this human was being offered ownership of her, like she was cargo to be traded. "What happens if you return to your people?" Deho asked her quietly. Kasira finally looked at him and saw genuine curiosity in his strange eyes. "I will be executed," she answered in a hollow voice, "or exiled, which is the same thing with extra steps. And if I claim the combat debt, then I belong to you until I repay it." She said, "By saving your life in combat or by service of equal value." Deho was silent for a long moment. Around them, the guards waited with weapons ready, and the crowd watched with hungry anticipation. Finally, the human nodded. "I invoke the combat debt." He called out to Galax, "Kasira Vaughn belongs to me until her debt is repaid." A strange mixture of relief and despair washed through Kasira. She would not die today, but she would live as the property of a human, a fate that many Drethin would consider worse than death. Galax laughed his horrible laugh. "Take her then, human, and get off my station." He turned to his guards, release the human's crew member, and escort them all to their ship. The guards lowered their weapons and began clearing a path through the arena. Deho put his arm around Kasira's waist to help support her weight. "Can you make it to the ship?" he asked. She nodded weakly. Together they walked out of the Crimson Arena, the human half carrying the Drethin warrior who had tried to kill him less than an hour ago. The crowd parted before them in silence. No one knew what to say. They had witnessed something that would be discussed across the galaxy for years to come. A human had defeated the undefeatable champion, and then he had shown her mercy as they left the arena behind. Kasira forced herself to speak. "Why?" she asked again. "Why did you spare me?" Deho did not answer immediately. He kept walking, supporting her weight as if it was nothing. Finally, he spoke in that quiet voice. "Because killing someone who has already surrendered proves nothing," he said. "And because everyone deserves a second chance." Kasira did not understand. Her entire culture was built on the idea that the strong ruled and the weak died. Mercy was weakness and compassion was foolishness. But this human had defeated her completely and then chosen to save her life at risk of his own. Perhaps, she thought, as consciousness began to fade from exhaustion and pain, perhaps she did not understand strength at all. The arena had grown silent in a way that Kasira Vaughn had never experienced before. Usually the crowd roared with excitement as she dismantled her opponents piece by piece. Usually the fight was over within minutes, and she stood victorious while her enemy lay broken and bleeding. But 3 minutes had passed as the signal horn, and the human was still standing. She had thrown 17 strikes, each one powerful enough to shatter bone and rupture organs. He had dodged 15 of them completely and absorbed the other 2 with movements that redirected the force away from his vital areas. How was this possible? Kazira attacked again with renewed fury, her 4 arms becoming a blur of copper scales and deadly intent. She was faster than any species in 3 sectors and stronger than creatures twice her size. No opponent had ever lasted this long against her. No opponent had ever made her work this hard. But the human kept moving. He flowed around her attacks like water around stones, never staying in one place long enough for her to land a solid blow. His strange calm eyes tracked her movements with an intensity that was almost disturbing. He was learning her patterns. He was adapting to her style. Kazira felt a chill run down her scaled spine as she realized what she was facing. This was not luck, and this was not tricks. This human was a predator in his own right, in the viewing platform above. Galax watched with growing unease. He had expected a quick death and a satisfied crowd. Instead, he was witnessing something that made no sense. What is happening? He demanded of his assistant. Why is the human still alive? The assistant frantically searched through data files on his tablet. I am reading about human evolution, he said with a trembling voice. They developed as persistence hunters on their homeworld. What does that mean? They chase their prey for hours or even days until the prey collapsed from exhaustion. The assistant explained. Their bodies are designed to outlast their opponents rather than overpower them. Galax watched the fight below with new understanding and new fear. She cannot tire him out. No. The assistant confirmed. He can tire her out. Back in the arena, Kazira was beginning to feel something she had not experienced since childhood. Fatigue. Her arms were growing heavy and her breathing was becoming labored. She had thrown more than 50 strikes now and landed fewer than 10. The human had taken those hits and kept fighting as if they meant nothing. Meanwhile, her own energy was draining away with every wasted attack. The human noticed her slowing, and for the first time, he went on the offensive. He moved inside her guard with shocking speed and delivered a precise strike to the nerve cluster beneath her upper right arm. Pain exploded through her limb and her arm went numb from shoulder to fingertips. Kazira roared in shock and swung her 3 remaining arms in a desperate counterattack. The human ducked under the blow and struck again, this time targeting the joint of her lower left arm. Something cracked and white-hot. Agony shot through her body. Her arm hung limp at her side, broken at the elbow. The crowd gasped in collective horror. Their champion had been injured. Their undefeatable warrior was being taken apart by a creature half her size. Kazira stumbled backward and stared at the human with eyes that showed something she had never revealed to any opponent. Fear. What are you? She whispered. The human did not answer. He simply waited, watching her with those patient predator eyes. Kazira understood then that she had made a terrible mistake. She had treated this fight like every other fight, relying on her superior strength and speed to overwhelm a weaker opponent. But humans were not weaker. They were different. They did not need to be stronger or faster because they had something far more dangerous. They had the ability to endure and adapt and overcome every species in the galaxy had evolved to survive their homeworld. The Drethan had developed armor and strength to dominate their world as apex predators. The Gorvath had evolved size and aggression to crush their competition. But humans had evolved on a world that seemed designed to kill them. They had survived ice ages and predators and diseases and disasters that would have destroyed most species. They had learned to adapt to anything because adaptation was the only way to survive on their death world. Planet and this human This soldier named Yoon Daeho carried 60,000 years of survival evolution in his blood and bones. Kasira attacked again because she did not know what else to do. Her two working arms struck with all her remaining strength. The human blocked. The first blow with a technique that redirected the force into empty air, and countered the second with a strike to her throat that left her choking and gasping. She dropped to one knee, her vision swimming and her lungs burning for air. The human could have finished her then. He could have struck her skull or snapped her neck or crushed her windpipe, but he did not. He stepped back and waited for her to recover. "Stand up," he said quietly. "The fight is not over." Kasira looked up at him with confusion mixing with her fear. Why had he not killed her? Any Drethan warrior would have taken the killing blow without hesitation. Any opponent she had ever faced would have ended the fight. When they had the chance, but this human was giving her the opportunity to continue, it made no sense. She forced herself back to her feet on shaking legs and raised her two working arms into a defensive posture. Blood dripped from a cut on her face, and her broken arm hung useless at her side for the first time in 847 fights. Kasira Vaughn looked like a defeated warrior. The crowd watched in stunned silence. Some of them had bet their fortunes on her victory. Others had traveled from distant systems to witness her legendary skills. None of them had expected to see her like this, broken and bleeding and afraid. The human attacked with a combination of strikes that Kasira could barely track. He moved with an efficiency that wasted nothing, every motion flowing into the next like a deadly dance. She blocked what she could, but he slipped past her guard again and again. Strikes landed on her ribs and her kidneys and the sensitive spots between her scales that most opponents never found. Pain became her entire world. She could not think and could not plan and could not do anything except try to survive the onslaught. But even that was becoming impossible. Her legs gave out and she crashed to the arena floor, her copper scales scraping against the stone. She tried to rise, but her body refused to obey. Everything hurt and nothing worked, and she could feel consciousness slipping away. The human stood over her, breathing hard, but still standing, blood covered his face and his arms from the few blows she had landed. But his eyes remained clear and focused. He looked down at her with an expression she could not read. Was it anger? Was it contempt? No. She realized with shock. It was something else entirely. It was respect. "You fought well," he said in that quiet voice. "Better than most." Kasira wanted to laugh, but she could not find the strength. Fought well? She had been destroyed, humiliated, broken in front of everyone who had ever worshipped her. She had nothing left. Not her pride, not her strength, not her identity as an undefeatable champion. The human had taken everything from her in less than 15 minutes. And now he would take her life as well. She closed her eyes and waited for the killing blow. But it did not come. Instead, the human spoke again. "I do not want to kill you," he said. Kasira opened her eyes and stared at him with disbelief. "Then finish it," she croaked through her damaged throat. "A Drethan who loses in combat does not deserve to live." "That is your culture talking," the human replied. "Not you." He extended his hand toward her as if offering to help her stand. The gesture was so unexpected that Kasira could only stare at it in confusion in the viewing platform above. Gulak slammed his fist against the railing in fury. "Kill her," he screamed at the arena below. "Finish the fight." But the human ignored him, and Kasira Vaughn, champion of the Crimson Arena, undefeated warrior of the Drethan, looked up at the small creature who had destroyed everything she was. Her pride shattered into 1,000 pieces. Her voice emerged as barely a whisper. "Please," she said as tears she did not know she could cry streamed down her scaled face. "Please spare me, human." The roar of 10,000 voices shook the walls of the Crimson Arena as Kasira Vaughn raised her 4 arms in victory once again. Her opponent lay broken at her feet, a Gorvath mercenary who had boasted about ending her reign before the fight began. Now he could not even stand. Kazira stood 7 feet tall with scales the color of dark copper and muscles that rippled beneath natural armor that had stopped blades and bullets alike. She was the champion of Station Vareth 9, and her record spoke for itself. 847 consecutive victories. Not a single defeat in 15 cycles of combat. The Drethan warrior looked down at the fallen mercenary with cold yellow eyes and felt nothing but emptiness where pride should have been. These fights had become boring long ago. No one could challenge her anymore. The crowd chanted her name, and she absorbed their worship like sunlight. But it did not warm her. She turned and walked out of the arena without looking back in the shadows of the viewing platform above. A fat creature with gray skin and too many teeth watched her leave with calculating eyes. His name was Galax, and he owned this station along with everything and everyone on it. He had made a fortune selling tickets to watch Kazira destroy her opponents, and he was always hungry for more. "Find me someone new," he said to his assistant, a nervous four-armed creature who flinched at every word his master spoke. Someone the crowd has never seen before. "Yes, Boss Galax," the assistant stammered, but who was left to fight her? Galax smiled his horrible smile. There is always someone. 3 days later, a small convoy of merchant ships docked at Station Vareth 9 for refueling and repairs. Among the crew was a human named Yoon Daeho, who served as their security contractor. He was not a large man by any standard. He stood just under 6 feet with a lean build and short black hair that was beginning to show traces of gray at the temples. His face carried the quiet calm of someone who had seen too much violence to be impressed by it anymore. Daeho had served in the Korean Special Forces back on Earth before the galaxy opened up and humans spread among the stars. He had fought in wars that most species could not imagine and survived battles that should have killed him many times over. But he did not speak of these things. He simply did his job and kept his people safe. The convoy planned to stay on Station Vareth 9 for 2 days while the engineers repaired a damaged engine. Daeho told his crew to stay together and avoid trouble. This was not a safe place for humans. Most species in the galaxy still viewed humanity as newcomers, weak creatures from a small planet at the edge of nowhere. Humans had only been part of galactic society for 60 years, and they had not yet earned the respect that older species commanded. Some aliens saw humans as curiosities to be studied. Others saw them as prey. On the second night, one of Daeho's crew members disappeared. Her name was Specialist Cha Yoonji, and she was barely 23 years old. Fresh from training and excited to see the galaxy, she had wandered away from the group to explore the station markets and never came back. Daeho searched for 6 hours before one of Galax's thugs found him and delivered a message. "Your little human belongs to Boss Galax now," the thug said with a grin that showed rotten teeth. "But you can earn her back if you want." "How?" Daeho asked, his voice flat and cold. "Fight in the arena," the thug answered. "1 match and she goes free." Daeho knew it was a trap. He knew Galax wanted to see a human die for the entertainment of his crowd. But he also knew that Yoonji would be sold to slavers, or worse if he refused. "Who is my opponent?" he asked. The thug laughed so hard that he nearly choked Kazira Vaughn. He finally managed to say between gasps of cruel amusement, "The champion herself." Word spread quickly through the station that a human had agreed to face Kazira in combat. Most species thought it was a joke. Others came to watch what they expected to be a quick and bloody execution. The betting pools opened with odds of 1,000 to 1 against the human. No one wagered on Daeho in her private quarters. Kazira received the news with something close to irritation. A human? She had crushed warriors twice her size and defeated creatures with natural weapons that could tear through starship hulls. What challenge could a soft-skinned human possibly offer? "This is an insult," she told her handler, an elderly Drethan named Vareth, who had trained her since childhood. "Galax wastes my time with this nonsense. Vareth shrugged his scaled shoulders and handed her the data file on her opponent. "He is a soldier," the old trainer said. "His species calls them special forces." "Special?" Cassira repeated with contempt dripping from the word. "What is special about a creature that dies from a single blow?" She did not bother reading the file. It did not matter who this human was, or what he had done on his primitive homeworld. He would die like all the others. The night of the fight arrived with all the spectacle that Galac's loved lights blazed across the crimson arena and music thundered from speakers embedded in the walls. The crowd packed every seat and filled every standing space until the massive chamber could hold no more. They had come to watch something rare. They had come to watch a human die. Deho walked into the arena wearing simple gray clothing and nothing else. The rules of the arena allowed no weapons and no armor in championship matches. Only flesh against flesh and will against will. He looked small, standing alone in the center of that vast space with thousands of alien eyes watching his every breath. The crowd jeered and laughed and threw insults in a dozen languages. Deho ignored them all. He closed his eyes and steadied his breathing, falling into the calm space inside himself, where fear could not reach. He had been here before in different arenas, on different worlds. The enemies changed, but the fight remained the same. Survival was not about strength or speed. It was about refusing to quit. The gates on the opposite side of the arena opened with a grinding roar, and Cassira Vaughn emerged into the light. She was everything the stories claimed, and more. Her copper scales gleamed under the arena lights, and her forearms flexed. With muscles that could crush stone, she moved with the fluid grace of a predator who had never known the fear of being prey. The crowd erupted into worship at the sight of their champion. Cassira walked to the center of the arena and stopped 10 feet from the human, looking down at him with those cold yellow eyes. "You are brave," she admitted, her voice deep and resonant like distant thunder. "Brave and stupid." Deho met her gaze without flinching. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but I am also still standing." Cassira laughed. A harsh sound that held no warmth. "Not for long, little human." The signal horn sounded, and the fight began. Cassira attacked with the speed of a striking serpent, all four arms moving in perfect coordination to deliver killing blows from every angle. She expected the human to fall in the first seconds like so many others before him. But Deho was not there. He moved before she struck, reading her body language and predicting her attacks with an instinct born from decades of combat experience. Her first blow missed by inches, and her second found only empty air. Cassira paused, genuinely surprised for the first time in years. The human stood 3 feet to her left, watching her with those strange, calm eyes. "Interesting," she murmured, and attacked again. The crowd fell silent as they watched something impossible unfold. The human was not dying. He was not even falling. He was dancing with death itself, and somehow staying one step ahead and deep in her warrior's heart. Cassira Vaughn felt something she had not experienced in a very long time. She felt the cold whisper of doubt.